What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Case Digital. In today's video, we are answering the question of what is a class in Python. So without further ado, let's hop right in and start coding. So a class in Python is a way for you to basically organize, data or like variables and add functionality. Now you can see here, I have this employee variable that is a dictionary, and you can tell by the curly braces if you aren't familiar with dictionaries. But essentially, this is organizing data for us, right? Well, what is different between this and a class? Well, a class essentially not only allows you to organize this data, but like I mentioned, allows you to add a functionality to it. Because say, for instance, in this employee, what happens if I want to say, based off this wage, say, hey, it worked, or this individual worked 40 hours or 80 hours this week, or however many hours in a month, how much are they going to get paid, right? Well, you'd have to actually go, take the data out of this dictionary, put it into some function, and away you go. Well, a class is basically like a blueprint, or basically not only can you add all the attributes and methods and everything that you need in one specific spot, which becomes basically a new data type, because that's what it is. It's basically a blueprint for a new data type that gives us the ability to manipulate and use all of that data. So let's talk about now the syntax to create an employee class. So the syntax for a class is essentially you have to give it the keyword of class, and then you have to give it the name of the what you want to actually name the class. So in our case, in this example, we're going to say employee. And this is probably the most common, this is pretty basic, but this is probably the most common example that people use, is because not only does an employee class, when you're thinking about it in terms of like, well, how much does an individual work and whatnot, is you not only show a good example of gathering like data, but also you show things that you can do with that data, such as creating methods like, calculating wage or calculating salary for a given, or salary earned or whatnot. So we give it this, and then we do a colon, and then essentially what you have to do is create what's called the constructor. Now, the constructor, you do a def for defining a method, and then you say double underscore init, and then double underscore, and then if you autocorrect, if you have an ID and you autocorrect, this is basically what will come out to. Now, this is the basic structure. Now, it has this keyword of self. Self only pertains to the stuff that is inside of this class. And that just allows you that as you go from function to function, you can reuse what are called, say, data attributes or member variables, if you're familiar with another programming language. And essentially what we can do is say, hey, for the class employee, we want them to have a name. So we have self.name, and then we'll do self.say they have a title, so like a position, and then self.wage. Now, how much they make. And then you could say per hour, whatever. But however, when I do this, I actually need to assign them to something. And when we create an employee, we want the ability to add, say, at the their name, their title, and their wage at the time of creation. Well, for our constructor, for the init, that basically means that we have to pass arguments. When you're familiar with functions, we have to pass arguments into this constructor, so that way we can get the information. So for example, we have a name, and that's just a string, and then we have a title, and again, that's going to be a string, and then we have the wage per hour, and we'll say that that's going to be a float, because maybe someone gets paid $4.60 an hour, or not $4.60, that'd be horrible, but like $40.60 an hour or something like that. I don't know. But essentially, now this allows us to assign these variables that get passed into our member variables. So I can say name is equal to name. And typically when I do this, like when I create the constructor, or the arguments into the constructor, I usually like to match them up with the member variables that I think that I would want to name for my class. So name, and then title, and you can see here, we'll do wage is equal to wage per hour. So now when I actually go to create an instance or create an object of this class, because again, a class is just the blueprint. It allows us to essentially say, here's all the information, that put it all in this one spot. And then when we instantiate it down here, so for example, if I say cur employee is equal to employee, and now I have to pass it the name, and we'll just say this is going to be John Smith, and then the title, we'll say this is a dev, and then we'll say the wage, and then we'll just say 60 right here is what I said. So now we've created an instance of this object. And what we can do here is essentially I can print out both of these. So I can say, let's print out employee, and then let's print out the current employee variables. And if I run this, you'll see that essentially I get a dictionary output, which is expected because this is a dictionary. But here's the difference. When I print out the employee class object, you'll see that it just basically gives us, hey, this is an employee object, and then that's its memory location. So if I really want to see the specific things from the employee class, I essentially have to say, like, hey, I want to see the name. I have to add that name in, because the thing that's nice here is if you're coming from a different programming language, like C++, for example, in Python, everything is public in a class. Other programming languages have things such as private, protected, or public, and some things are always private or protected. But in Python, everything is public, and essentially what that means is I can basically say variable name dot and then whatever class data attribute or data or member variable that I'm trying to get, and it'll show up for us. So it'll just print it out or do whatever we're trying to do. What I mean by that is that I can do this exact line right here, and then it'll print this out. And if I run this, you'll see that, hey, this is John Smith. So right now you're probably thinking like, well, Zach, what's really the difference right now between this dictionary and this class? Other than that they're organized in two different types of data types, right? This is a dictionary type, and then this is our employee type. Well, the difference is, like right now, probably not a lot. However, this allows for organizing stuff really well. That's what classes are meant to do. They're supposed to be a place to organize things essentially into objects, basically grouping like things, so that way you can use that object in the way that it would, maybe that you intend to use it. Now, however, if we essentially go ahead and add a class method, which we're going to do by saying def, and then we'll say calc underscore income. Now, when I do this doesn't become essentially we need to essentially right here add self. And what that does allows us now that I can say, hey, and then we'll put in a variable, say hours worked. And this will be a float, and then we'll output essentially a float, and this will be our $sign. So now, because we have this self in here, that tells us, hey, that this method right here belongs to this class, and I can use these member variables here. So I can say, so in our case, we'll just do return, and then we'll say self.wage per hour times the hours worked, and then that'll essentially return out. Now, if I didn't put self here, my IDE will yell at me and say, hey, self is not defined because it doesn't recognize that this function or that this method is a part of this class. And so that's why we need to have self. So now we can go ahead and we can say, I want to print out my current employee's wage, or calc income, and we'll calc it, say, for 40 hours. So if this person worked 40 hours in the month at $60 an hour, this is saying that it'll make basically $2,400 for that period of time, right? So this is the thing that's different from being a data type such as a dictionary or a list or a set or any of these other data types that are kind of the basic data types that come with Python. Is these classes allow us to essentially add these functionality to do certain things. Where you normally wouldn't have it. So for example, like to calculate the wage here, I would essentially have to say something like employee, and then wage, and then times 60. And that's not bad. This is not a bad example. You could do something like that. But what happens when you have, say, you put this into a system where you have thousands of employees, and you basically just need to input or have each employee calculate their own, essentially, income for a given hourly set? Well, that's where classes become very useful. Now, this is a pretty easy example or pretty simplistic example of what a class is and how you can make one. Essentially, that is what I was trying to answer. I was trying to answer of the question of what is a class. And to be honest, to summarize everything up again, a class is just a way to organize your data and have a way to manipulate that data all in one place, all in one object, in correspondence to what the purpose of that object is supposed to do. For example, in our employee class, like if you were to put this into, say, some software for tax season or for basically your own company to keep track of employees and their information and their wage and all that stuff, creating a class like this becomes really, really nice, because when you get all that data in, you can import it into your class and create, now you have a place where this class structure allows you to take all that data and manipulate it in all the different ways that you may need to, so that way you can get the results that you want. Whereas if you didn't, and if you didn't have a class and used all these, say, like lists or dictionaries or stuff like that, when you put them into this format, you're just creating, you're manually having to create functions to do all this, and how to pass all those functions in that could have all these different, say case or edge cases, where when you can just build that into a class, it makes it really, really easy to manipulate and control all the data that you're using, especially when you start going into and doing things with in the world of object-oriented programming, which is another topic that we can do. But it's a type of programming where you're basically taking objects or taking data, and you're saying, well, how can I form this into, say, an object, like a person object for or a person class for an address address book, or an employee class for tax software and stuff like that. Like, classes give you a ability just to be able to manipulate that data in the way that you see fit based on, your needs for that. So if you have any questions about this, please leave them in the comments below. If this has provided you any help, please smash the like button. And again, I'm going to plan on making more videos on classes, because I've learned a couple things over the last couple of months that have kind of just like either I forgot about or they were just eye-opening. So stay tuned for those videos, because as they come out, I'll show you the power and the benefits behind what you can do with classes. So until next time, keep on programming.